Hey, welcome back to Vintage Stories. We got a good one today with Rod Easthope, but I'll get back to that in a second. I just wanted to remind everybody who's local here in Hawke's Bay that we are amongst folk. Now, for those of you that don't live in Hawke's Bay or live outside of New Zealand, and you think I just swore into the microphone, how dare I? Folk is Food and Wine Coalition. And it's twice a year events we do here in Hawke's Bay. They don't need my help promoting it, but there are a few tickets left for random events, including one a bunch of us are doing this Saturday out in Mangatahi. It should be quite a hoedown. A few wineries, including Easthope Family Winegrowers and Rod Easthope, who I am speaking with today on the podcast. So yeah, just go to the Falk's website. They got billboards, man. These people know what they're doing. There's awesome events. There's celebrity chefs. There's all kinds of stuff going on. And in 2 weeks, I'm doing 2 lunch events with Chris and Alex from Pippi Restaurant, one of the sort of cool local places here in Hawke's Bay. They asked me to do it, and I was jumped at the opportunity because they're just so cool to work with. And they've got this awesome property sort of south of Hastings. I think it's an old homestay, and we're going to talk about Alex's books. She's got a new book out called Pippi at Home. Her first Pippi cookbook just did tremendous. And this is, more homey recipes and things like that. And we're going to pair wines with the food, and it's just going to be a little party down there. I think that one, tickets are going, there's not as many tickets, whereas the Super Celebration coming up this Saturday, the 17th, get that date right. Yeah, the 17th. There are some tickets left. There's buses, but it's probably, all I'm saying is a little more, just pay attention to booking that one a little more, because you got to get transportation out there. You don't have to. You could drive yourself, but there's going to be some drinking going on, so you probably don't want to be driving. Check those out online. And, of course, check out decibelwines.com. We've got some new releases up there. And send us an email, decibeldispatch@gmail.com. I think I forgot to mention that last episode with Yvonne, which I got a really good response to. So thanks for some people who reached out about that. Today we have Rod Easthope. Rod and I have only sort of in the last year or so become more acquainted, probably because of this project that he's doing, and he's sort of stretching his legs a bit. And I've been out to his property. It's amazing. And I suggest you guys follow them on Instagram, rod.easthope on Instagram, or easthope_winegrowers. And just check out this property. It's awesome. Not only is Rod on the precipice of, sort of new wine revolution here in Hawke's Bay, doing some interesting varietals, some premium boutique wines, but he's also literally on the precipice, right on the edge of the old Ngaruroro River, which, if any of you have ever had some Giblet Gravels wines, including the Decibel Malbec, I've usually wrote that on the back label. That's the river that formed the Giblet Gravels, shifted a couple hundred years ago again, and now, once again, as we always talk about with Hawke's Bay, it's about rivers, former riverbeds, hillsides, creating all these different meso and microclimates. And Rod's got a great spot down there, so I suggest you check it out. I suggest you contact them, go try to set up a tasting. It'll be an exclusive one if you do. He doesn't really have a tasting room, but they do, if you make it that far down Mangatahi Road to his beautiful property, I'm sure he'll indulge you. Rod and I had a really good conversation. There was a lot of stuff I didn't know about him. I was particularly interested in some of his South African experience, because I have none and don't really know that much about it. I've, as we talked about during the podcast, tasted some more interesting South African wines more recently, kind of hit years ago, and we're just in the mix. But now I feel like the last few times I've tasted some really good stuff. So he had some things to say about that. Check them out. Visit them on easthope.co.nz. Thanks, Rod, for doing it, and enjoy. discussing Easthope Family Winegrowers. And you said something earlier, and we can go back everything. All your heads are on the front of the label.
Yeah, we invested a lot of time and money in getting the right label, and the label designers came up with a concept that surprised us initially. But it's essentially our mug shots all over the label in silhouette, and it really struck a chord with us. Obviously, our young boys also loved it.
Yeah, of course.
But it's all about conveying the fact that we're a family-owned business in a sea of wines out there in the world that are made by sort of faceless corporations, really.
Yeah.
And it was important to us to get that sincerity of what our business is and what we're doing on our property across on our label.
Yeah, I think it's really important to Hawke's Bay at this stage as well, that because we seem to have an interesting range of, there's definitely some corporates here, but there's obviously some long-standing family-owned operations with some really cool history, and then there's some startups and some comers and goers and people that have been in and out. But it can be tough and sort of muddy the waters a bit, particularly for the overseas market if they're not as familiar with the region, to know who's in what appellation, who's where. And we were talking earlier, you're in your own little appellation down the road.
Yeah, we searched for the right spot for about 10 years, and my wife, Emma, long suffering, had to endure possibly the worst driving husband in the world, because I spent my entire life while driving around Hawke's Bay with my neck twisted to the hills, going, well, is that a northeast facing slope?
Yeah.
Can we jump that fence? Can we persuade that farmer to sell us a bit of land? And it's taken a long time to find the right spot. And we think we found the right spot, but it is quite a long way out of town. People would call it Marae Kākaho, but it's truly Mangatahi.
Mm-hmm.
So about 25 minutes due west of Hastings. But for people that know Hawke's Bay, the other side of the river from Crownthorpe.
From Crownthorpe, yeah. Yeah, you face some of the big vineyards out that way as well.
Yeah.
And so you just mentioned 10 years. What were you doing 10 years ago?
I was 10 years. I arrived back in New Zealand after being in South Africa for about 8 years.
Oh, okay. I didn't realize you were in South Africa that long.
Yeah, so I was making wine there. In amongst vintages, the requisite vintages in Burgundy and Italy and that sort of thing along the way. And my wife, Emma, who's also a Kiwi, Hawke's Bay born and bred as well, it's time to start nesting.
Yes.
So time to come back to New Zealand, the best place to nest in the world.
Yeah.
So I was lucky enough to become winemaker and eventually chief winemaker at Craigie Range during that time, and spent some 7 years there. But be fair to say, I was never really quite well built for employment. So I was always seeking that opportunity or that gap with enough time and energy left in the tank to actually build my own wine business on my own vineyard. As I say, I was always looking out the window to try and find the right spot.
I think a lot of, there's a few different paths that you can take in the industry, but, you probably started a lot younger than I did. I came to New Zealand when I was 31 and I already had it in my head that I wanted to do my own thing. But I was, I obviously have to work for other people and I still do, and work with other people. But there is sort of that road where it's like eventually you're going to become the corporate man and work, big winemaker or assistant winemaker somewhere, and you just kind of sit nestled into this job. Or eventually you're going to be the personality that, is going to break out and do your own thing, or you're going to be the face of a brand or something like that. And if I've seen it time and time again where, they say, yeah, great, I've been doing these vintages and I'm going back and forth and I love winemaking. And then eventually they're like, wait a minute, I don't have a home. I've got nothing to show for the work I've done, except for a lot of knowledge, which is great, and a lot of great experience. But at some stage you reach your life where you're like, what am I going to do now? Like, what's my imprint going to be? Why I've been doing this for a passion. I wanted to, put my name onto something. So, it's interesting you phrase it like that, that you're, not employable, would you say? Because your head's somewhere else. I can totally relate to that. And it doesn't mean that you didn't do a great job when you were at Craigie, because I like those wines from when you were there. I still do. But it's funny going back to that. I was just thinking when I first came to Hawke's Bay, I think I was at EIT at the time, and somebody said, we were talking about different wineries and everything, and somebody said, Craigie's got Rod, and he's quite an asset for them and everything like that. And I just remember the cocky prick that I am thinking like, I'll see about that. Who's this guy? And then, but I really all those years, I think I may have met you once or twice, but we really didn't catch up until we did a tasting at Trinity Hill like a year or two ago. And then I was like, oh yeah, this guy's hilarious. Like, he's cool. So, and it makes sense then that you say, like, personality wise, you wanted to do your thing. I get it.
Yeah, I think it's personality. I think impetus alone is not enough. Cracking into this industry as a sole trader ain't for the faint-hearted. I got told when I first went into the industry by the famous Len Evans from Australia. So he said, "You're going to be a winemaker," and I said, "Yeah." He says, "You're going to live like a millionaire." I thought, "Phew, that sounds pretty good." He said, "But you'll never actually be one." And there's a lot of truth in that. But having the balls or the means to actually leap out and go on your own, it is a leap of faith, and it'd be fair to say. I wake up at 3:00 in the morning sometimes shaking my head at myself. But by 7 a.m. the next morning, I'm ready to go again.
Yeah. You kind of, that's the thing. You wake up and you feel it. And I have to say, haven't been to your property, and now I haven't been to your house since it's been finished. I would think waking up to that on most days when it's not kind of rainy and drizzly like it is today, but most days in Hawke's Bay, you'd feel pretty inspired to say, yeah, look at this, let's get into it,
Yeah, it's we've only moved into the property properly a couple of months ago, into the house, and it's almost zen-like each morning.
Yeah,
to be honest, we look out at the river, we're the only ones there. It sets the scene, and you know where you're at, you're grounded, this is your purpose, and yeah, it seemed to have that feeling every morning, so long may it last.
But you spent many years, well, I guess when you were at Craigie, you were sort of grounded doing your thing there, but I just wanted to go back to, where was your first vintage at?
Well, it goes back a long way. I started having holiday jobs at Cook's at Tikawata.
I don't know what that is. So.
It's a very old winery in the Waikato region.
Okay.
Grand old name, when there was quite a bit of viticulture in that area. So this goes back to the mid-'80s. And then had my heart set on being a winemaker from the age of 14 or 15. And at that stage, you almost had to petition Roseworthy College to let you in, because it was very much a club.
Yeah.
Managed to get in there, balanced my work and social life perfectly, scraped through.
Roseworthy, though, I do have to expose, there's people listening all over the world here.
Yeah.
That's in.
They should know what Roseworthy is.
It's in Australia.
Yeah. So it's now
they don't know. I'll tell you, they don't know what Roseworthy is in America. I would say, outside of maybe some people in California or something.
Yeah. So Roseworthy College, at the time in New Zealand, there was no degree offered in wine science. There was little dabblings by some of the polytechs, but nothing serious. So you had to go to Australia. Wagga or Roseworthy were the places to go. Roseworthy is now part of the Adelaide campus, so it's about an hour north of Adelaide, the campus itself. Classic agricultural college, but had a pretty good wine science degree, very practical degree. You came out actually knowing how to actually run a winery.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was good grounding, lots of great contacts, obviously. And from there, I got a job at Pepper Tree Wines in Australia, being the winemaker straight out of university. Luckily, had some great friends around me and winemakers, and it was very collegial, and they helped me through a lot of those early years. But after about 2 years, I came to the conclusion I was making pretty average self-taught wines, and I was muddling through, to be honest.
Yeah.
And had to seek a mentor. And at that stage, there was a lot happening in Marlborough. So I went to work for Vintech, which is now Repara Vintners, which was basically where nearly all of Marlborough's wine was made at the time, and was run by John Belsham. And I sort of learnt that John Belsham / Brian Crozer, very reductive, clean, process winemaking that was suited the production down there perfectly. Sauvignon Blanc based mostly, Riesling, that sort of thing.
Yep.
And came into contact with 30 odd winemakers that were making wine through that facility. So you got to see how lots of people did it. Unfortunately, I did it in the worst vintage ever in Marlborough in 1995, which may not be necessarily a bad thing in hindsight, but it makes 2017 look quite sunny. So that was useful. And then from there, started doing some vintages overseas, Burgundy, northern Italy.
Where are you at in northern Italy?
I was working in Piemonte.
It's a good spot.
Yeah, not bad. Had more than my fair share of great tastings of Barolo and Barbaresco, and that love for those wines has never left.
There's a documentary coming.
I saw that.
That Barolo Boys one's coming to Hawke's Bay.
I saw that.
I think we're going to have to go check that out.
Yeah, I think that sounds like a boys' night out. Yeah.
Well, it'd be tough for me not to bring the Italian wife with me. But she can hang. She can drive. She's a great driver.
Perfect.
Yes. Anyway, yeah, Piemonte, awesome. So I think we might try to go there this winter. So I might hit you up for some contacts.
Yeah,
dude,
I've got a couple. So yeah,
that's all it takes.
I think they're still talking to me.
Just to start, yeah. And then so Burgundy and Piemonte, and were you going back and forth then too?
Yeah, there's a little bit of that, and I was interspersing that with work back here in Australia and New Zealand, and then I was back here one summer sifting, doing nothing, and Kim Milne gave me a call to see if I could do a vintage in South Africa, in one of the wineries he was consulting to. That winery happened to be Rustenburg Estate, which is a grand old name of South African wine. So I went there, played a bit of rugby, worked the vintage.
Kiwi, sure.
A couple of weeks into it, the incumbent winemaker resigned, who had been there for 20 odd years, and so I was sort of handed the ball. And 8 years later, I was still in South Africa.
So you were at the same chateau, or was it,
for the first 5 years? I was, yeah, and then consulted to them afterwards, and set up my own consultancy business over there.
I'm sure it's. I've had friends who did vintages in South Africa. I've never been, but to give folks an idea, what would you say it's got to be really complex, I would think, the industry there,
the industry's pretty easy to sum up. They had quota systems. They had the KWV, which was the government-owned winery that bought any excess that you produced and turned it into brandy.
Okay,
that
helps.
Totally different setup to New Zealand, which is New Zealand was small entrepreneurs starting with a tin shed and going for it. Theirs is a 350-year-old industry with wineries that have been there that long. Parts of South Africa are older than Bordeaux.
Yeah.
So there's history. I flew over there knowing none of this. I was just going to go over there and make an impression. But the country made a real impression on me. Their potential is phenomenal. The climate, the soils, the resources, and absolutely incredible. And, Stellenbosch now is like the Napa in terms of the style of investment that you've actually got there.
Yeah.
So quite different, still very, very different to New Zealand. But I'd say, when I got there, they were behind New Zealand and Australia in terms of innovation and what's happening. Lots changed there in the last few years, and I'm taking my lead from some of the mavericks they're doing.
Yeah, I've tasted some fantastic stuff out of there when I was in Philly, running a, modest wine list there. They were, it was sort of a really good gauge of what was going on in the industry, because you'd be like, all of a sudden Pinot Gris would come in from Austria or Shiraz from Australia, and we were moving cases, so we get all this stuff thrown our way. And obviously California is doing their thing, and it's very European on that part of America as far as French, Italian, German history. So those wines are accepted, but South Africa was sort of up and down, a little bit confusing. You'd get a good bottle, you get a bad bottle, but in recent years, and some trips back to the States is where I usually get to taste the most wine because it's such a great market. The South African stuff's just blown my mind. Wow, this is great, amazing Chenin. Even Chardonnays, big reds. Haven't quite got my head around what makes them distinctly what they are. The more I taste, the more I like. But it's interesting you say that, because I've noticed it. Literally, it's palatable. You know,
Yeah.
that the wines are just keep seeming like, what's going on there?
Yeah, there's
you
a lot
know?
going on there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I never really studied or looked into that. You know, I know Stellenbosch, obviously, and I know a few regions. Oh, yeah, I've heard of that one and have friends work in places, but I've never really looked at it in depth and said, all right, I'm going to start trying to buy some more wines from there. But I probably should, because it sounds like they're on the uptick, you know?
Yeah. No, that's there's a lot going on, and it's happening at the extremities. I mean, the heart of South Africa is still Stellenbosch, but you've got the southern cooler regions like Elgin and Cape Agulhas that are probably producing more wines that we recognise as cool climate styles that would sit alongside the best from New Zealand. Very similar sort of style. And then you go to the other end, the really dry Swartland, Paardeberg, and that's where some real innovation is happening with the old bush vine vineyards that they've discovered and that sort of thing. They seem more open to blends.
Yeah. That's like some of what I've had in recent years, is some amazing red blends.
It seems like their clientele is more open to it. Whereas I think in New Zealand, the sort of the big 7 single cultivars still drive most of the wine buying public's decisions, which I find a little bit limiting here. You want to go out on a limb and produce some interesting stuff, and then you go and have to find the 6 or 7 people that'll buy it in the country. Makes doing some of that more innovative stuff here, I think, a bit of a challenge, and always seems to be an add-on to what you do alongside some sort of
I think it's why you got to export if you want to be a little more progressive. You know?
Damn. No one told me that.
Yeah. Well, we were just talking about somebody in America drinking your wine. But no, I think it's happening. Like, you know, I was just talking to somebody a couple days ago about how the Auckland wine market in the last 8 years from when I got here, and if that's any gauge in the way like New York City would be or San Francisco would be to the U.S. market, is that the trend is more adventurous. And I think a big part of it is the amount of imported wines that have come in, good imported wines that have come in from Europe and starting to be America now, which I've never saw when I first got here. It was literally like 2 producers, I think Ridge and just one awful brand I would see in the supermarket. But you see younger people a little more adventurous, knowing a little bit more about wine. So hopefully that translates to our wines being tried more within the country.
I think you're right. And I think the rise of, sommeliers having more power and much more of a conduit of information from producer to consumer than what they were in the past. And I think New Zealand was a latecomer to that in terms of making that a real profession, and restaurants and businesses really knowing that they needed someone like that amongst their ranks. And I think that's driven a lot of change in New Zealand recently as well.
I was just thinking, even the cocktail scene is like helped the wine scene, because you might have some flash bartender who's like, he doesn't want to be outsmarted by not knowing enough about the wines as well. So they're just kind of all studying up on their WSETs, and you just hear it more in the ether that there's a little more appreciation for all that stuff and different styles.
And I think the thing is, it's less critical appreciation, it's more aesthetic. And I think we've come out of an industry that if it evaluates a wine, it looks for the fault first, and if it's fault free, it's a good wine. And now we've moved to the point now where wines are essentially fault free, and aesthetics on top of that faultlessness is what people are looking for. And that's where the boundaries are now being pushed of aesthetics, which is far more subjective. So there's a larger bandwidth of possibilities because of that.
Yeah, and I think some of it is the industry, not in a sort of mean way, but just a defensive way of saying, like, you can't do that or we shouldn't do that. And I mean, I get it. For instance, I've tasted some Cabernet made in Hawke's Bay in the 80s and even early 90s that was just lime beans and green, and so we thought that was good. Yeah, we're overly sensitive to the green thing, and we probably get caned on it more than Bordeaux does, or even Napa or somebody like that. And I made a Malbec in 2010 that I thought was, and 2011, you can imagine from 2011, that definitely had some green notes to it. Took it to America, and they were like, wow, that's really interesting and lifted and aromatic, and that's unique and all that. And if I would have tried to sell it around here or talk to, I don't know about that. That's, so it's all perspective and all that. And then I think the fact that you have the family thing going on too, with the new drinker and the up and coming appreciation of wine. They want the story, they want to know, like, they want authenticity. They want that's a word that I keep harping on the last few weeks with some of the projects I'm involved in, and they just want to know. They just want to be honest. Like, this is the way we do this one, and this is. I buy the fruit from this guy, and this person helps me do it, and they're cool. Like, awesome. All right, great. What's it cost? All right, great. Pretty straightforward rather than. But I even think that is for the corporate guys too. Is like, oh yeah, it's just a big winery, and it's awesome value, great.
Yeah.
I don't need to look into it anymore, but it's cheap and it's pretty darn good, and I can drink it on a Tuesday night or something.
Yeah, there's time and a place for that.
Yeah,
that's for sure.
Yeah. So and then sometimes what you always are looking for is that gem that over delivers and nobody seems to know about yet or anything. So hopefully that's. Easthope Family Winegrowers. So what are you, just for the folks out there, what are you producing? Because I know I have some of my favorites that you've made. But
so until our own vineyard matures, we've been buying in parcels. But where we do that, we manage the few rows ourselves. So when I say manage it, we do all the fruit thinning, lateral thinning, wings off, all that jazz we do ourselves. And when I say we, my wife and I. So we're utilising parcels from various vineyards, but the main thrust of it is the Skeetfield Vineyard Chardonnay. We make a Tamuna Vineyard Pinot Noir from Martinborough, so we bring that fruit.
Where's
up.
the Skeetfield?
Skeetfield's in Ohiti. So if you are going from the Gimlet Gravels, go through Fernhill and then head west, first vineyard on the right. Old Mendoza.
Quite rich style. Because of Mendoza or the soil, or
it has tiny berries because of the inherent virus in Mendoza. It's quite heavy soils, but unirrigated, so always been dry farmed.
That's good.
Doesn't throw many bunches anymore. And I don't know how to sum it up, but some years it can be quite lean, mineral, steely, fresh. And other years, a peachy, but it always has a natural reductive sort of element to it, varying from each year. But if you're shy of that sort of burnt match sort of thing in Flint, our Chardonnay is probably not for you.
Not for you.
Yeah, but it's something we like, but wouldn't dare adulterate. So we, our winemaking is essentially grapes, yeast sometimes, not often, and sulfur, and that's it. So we just don't even look at tannins and enzymes and acids and fining agents and things like that. It's just, we just want to keep it as, and I think that comes back to the honesty part of it.
Yeah. The tricks. And what, so you said Chardonnay? Yeah,
so the Chardonnay, the Pinot, the recent thrust of the brand that's made a little bit of noise for us is the Gamay.
Yes, I know.
And
I have an employee who's very into your Gamay.
That's surprised us how the uptake of that wine and how much noise it's actually made for us. And we had vines on order from Riversun to plant, and we're planting this year. So we thought we're a few years off planting Gamay until a friend of ours mentioned it. He thought there was some Gamay on a vineyard near to us, and I said, really? We went and checked it out, and sure enough, it was. And the owners of this particular patch had just been throwing it in with the rest of their reds because they thought no one wanted it.
Yeah.
And so we took over that in 2014 for the 2015 vintage, and it's a fascinating little wine. And that interest in Gamay has really been kindled by the fact that I used to drink a lot of Burgundy, good Burgundy.
Yeah.
It's too expensive, and now we've got some good importers in New Zealand. Maison Veron and Peter Maud that bring in some really, really nice Beaujolais.
I just got a nice little package from Maison Veron with the Beaujolais in there. So it's kind of the way I guess the industry works too. It's like, oh, we can't get it from there.
Yeah.
Now we're been outbid, and who can afford to drink $50 Pinots, or more, if you're lucky.
Yeah, well, even Premier Cru, good Premier Cru Burgundies now over $100 a bottle, most of it.
Yeah, especially down here too.
Yeah.
So you start looking for other places to fill that void for those dishes, and restaurants do the same thing. They just can't pour it. So, but it does bring up the idea that it's like, damn, Hawke's Bay does another good varietal really well.
Although I think this one, you're right. Hawke's Bay is a vast area with a big range of mesoclimates, and so our our canvas is very blank. We can do a lot of things, and that's from a marketing point of view a bit of an Achilles heel. But I'd rather be in that position than pigeonholed into only being able to do this and this. And
I certainly wouldn't have stayed here if and I didn't know a thing about Hawke's Bay, except for
and climatically, the reputation of Hawke's Bay, at least here and maybe the UK, has been made on Bordeaux Reds and latterly Syrah. But I would argue that those wines, you need to be at the apex of production to make good wines out of those cultivars in Hawke's Bay, and they come from a very small subset of sites within the greater Hawke's Bay that can do Bordeaux style blends and Syrah well. The rest of Hawke's Bay is actually a bit cooler and maybe a bit wetter, and I think that brings into all those sort of middle varietals ripen slightly earlier. But I put Merlot in that camp, and I put Gamay, Chardonnay, obviously, but a whole heap of other stuff that we can do. And I think that's just fantastic. I've never pinned my hopes on the generic image of the region selling my wine for me. So the fact that it's diverse and we don't have perhaps a unified singular story, I don't see that as hampering at all to at least my individual business or your individual business going out and doing what it needs to do and selling itself.
Yeah, I think for the long term, especially, I was just thinking about this, like if we're never going to be Napa, and we're not next to San Francisco, and we don't have like Bordeaux where there's, this history there. So it's, you could come as a tourist to Hawke's Bay and come 5 times and get 10 different experiences. You could have, this time we hung out at Tijuana and did this and drank these Chardonnays and, and then we went to, we did the Giblet Gravels thing, or we did the Bridge Pa thing, and there's enough wine and different styles in there that, I even think just between Bridge Pa and Giblet Gravels, it's like you have these Bridge Pa's like just chocolate mocha, really fleshy Cabernet and Merlot and things, and then the Gravels is like this angular, totally different thing, and it's striking in another way, and so they're right next to each other.
Yeah, exactly.
There's some vineyards like go across both. You know, so that's probably a good thing for us in the long run, like you said. But even just as certainly as producers and the way I think the industry is going, I get it. But even just tourism, like people just coming to hang out, like we were talking about my buddy Tom earlier who came here, and he was just a couple comments were like, man, I tasted so many different kinds of wines there. He came down here to try to get his head on so he could help me sell a little bit more wine in New York, but he's like, I'm almost a little more confused after I left. So he actually came back again last week, and he's starting to get it a little more now. So that, there's that challenge, but I think it's a good place to explore and find different. And there are people like you and it's a guy at Delaterre. They're like kind of stretching out and going into these different places. Obviously, the Southern Hawke's Bay folks, or Central Hawke's Bay, that are doing different things. And you're kind of pushing. Now we're pushing. I'd be interested to see people pushing up into the hillsides. And obviously, there's people out in they say the Tamata Hills or whatever, there's all these little areas, and so I think it's great. It's great. Certainly a good place to learn and drink wine.
Oh yeah, we've always got that. I think your mate Tom might have had a far easier time even 5 years ago, let alone 10. It was a very easy region to understand. Pretty much dominated by medium to large style wineries, all producing versions of the same thing, to be honest. And it's really only been quite recently that we've seen this step out. And while guys in Waipara down south and central Otago are wearing sandals and got dreadlocks and making these wacky, cool wines and having a great time, Hawke's Bay has been much more conservative stylistically and that sort of thing. But we're finally, I think, the shackles have been loosened a little bit, and we're seeing some really, really cool, innovative stuff happening, and people feeling less bound to what Hawke's Bay is meant to produce from a classical perspective.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. I'm very curious to see, from how that, and I don't think there'll be like any fights or anything like that, but it's just going to be kind of interesting to watch those dynamics between, as I've called it, the old guard and the new guard, and there's that cool history there, but there's also, I know a few producers who just raise their eyebrow like, what, you're doing what,
Yeah.
like what
I think every region's probably got that.
Yeah.
We go back to South Africa, that's probably
Oh,
the
yeah.
biggest example of that, of the grand old names producing their Bordeaux blends, and then you've got the wackos up north and south doing their cool thing. And I think there's always room for both. So yeah, long may it continue. But it's interesting. I think I've heard on some of your previous podcasts. I'm the listener.
Okay, cool. Wow. You and a few other
this
people.
old guard, new guard thing, and I don't see the distinction so much, because I was thinking of all the older winemakers in Hawke's Bay, and they're pretty much 45 to 50. And I'd say they're probably just hitting their straps, actually, most of them. And I'd take
no, I think you're right in that the winemakers are. It's that the owners are probably. I think there's a few different
I think that's
levels,
an important distinction.
and I think that there is a distinction on who owns the brand and who's behind the brand, whereas I think there, like you said, maybe there was pretty easy 10, 15, 20, even 20 years ago that it was like either this corporation or these people have owned this for a long time, or there's somebody with a boatload of money who comes in and they're just going to buy this vineyard and get the wines made and do that. Whereas I think people of, and it's a bit of a jab. I'm just kind of joking around when I say the new guard, because it's not like we're going to like take over anything, but I think that the next sort of winemakers and these brands that are coming up are people that actually like grew up making wine, that came at it from this passion of like, I don't own anything yet. I'm just working for these other people. But I have these ideas and I want to try this different thing.
Yeah.
And some of the different thing might just be small production of what has already been done in the past of classic styles, but really premium. And so even some of the small wineries that have been established in the last 20 years, I found in my experience that they're just a guy who was a businessman who came out and said, yep, I'm going to invest in a winery and do that, where I think there's a distinction in that sense. Now, granted, the other comment that Tom made when he was here that I thought was just great, and I obviously appreciate but take for granted, is that he said, man, nobody's dicks. Like, nobody was fighting amongst each other. Everybody was like, yeah, come on in, have a tasting. The best example is that we showed up to Trinity the one day, and you and Matt from Clearview and Warren were up there, and Damien, and they, it was 20, 30 Syrahs open, and everybody's inviting. And he was commenting he's been to other wine regions, including places in upstate New York, where he was just like, they're always talking behind each other's back, and this guy, I don't think he's doing this, and I just don't see that around here. As I could call almost anybody I wanted to and be like, hey man, I'm in trouble. I need to get this brought from here to there, or you had. Was it a few months ago you got a flat tire and you had to pull into Paratua? Like, you didn't think twice about doing that, what I mean?
No.
And believe it or not, in some regions, that's rare, or that isn't. You don't feel, I don't want to talk to that guy. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I think that's part of New Zealand's psyche a little bit. Maybe too lazy to be angry.
Yeah.
It's just it takes a lot of effort to have angst. And so I think that's just part of the national psyche for the most part. Just it's easier to get along.
And I think this, the seclusion and the being out in the country, that's definitely part of the national psyche of like, people are tough.
Yeah.
You get through some winter, and we don't have a lot of insulation, and this guy needs help with some firewood. All right, we'll go help him chop it up. Or, that old school, which is still. You still need firewood here, but that sort of thought. People are there for each other when it really counts. So I think that definitely translates to the industry around here, and so
definitely does.
It's probably something that we need to. I don't want to separate, you know what I mean, but I do like to stir up the pot a little bit and make fun of each other a little bit,
Yeah, it's interesting. I still think that distinction. I'll still take you to task on it. I think, even though it's a stir up to stimulate some conversation, but I see some of the most innovative things happening. I look, Trinity Hill across the road here.
Totally.
John Hancock and Warren, been innovating for the last 25 years there with their cultivars and what they've gone out and done. I mean, they're making tawny ports, for goodness sake.
Yeah, I know. And beer.
And beer and, white Rhone varietal blends. And, I think he's at the certainly at the apex of sort of Chardonnay remodernisation in Hawke's Bay and that sort of thing. So, and Warren won't mind me saying this. He's an old timer, man. He's still innovating. I think every time I have a glass of wine with him, he's thinking about the next thing and how he can improve upon what he's doing. And
I can't wait to sit down and talk to him. And I'm not sure where to start.
Yeah,
but
exactly.
He's one of the guys who, literally the first weekend I was here, I met him at it was the old Harvest Hawke's Bay festival they used to do.
Yeah.
And I was just with a guy who brought me there. I think he was chasing some girl. And I just hung out and drank and watched a band and then helped clean up at the end. And he's just generous and nice. And all through the years, he's always just been like, so what's going on with Decibel? Yeah, cool. He's just like genuine. And but then on top of that, one of the best winemakers I've ever met.
Yeah,
tasted,
exactly. And I mean, Trinity Hill's like a halfway house for for lost winemakers. We call it a lost land tent in New Zealand. And if you're ever at a loss, nothing to do, pop in there mid-afternoon, and you'll get a great tasting glass of wine and shoot the banter with them and feel part of the furniture. And then
it shows too. That place is. I've always commented. I think their tasting room is just leaps and bounds above everybody else's because it's just the vibe of the people that work there. They always seem to have nice people, and if you go in there, they have the right balance of being like getting you a nice glass of wine, but not on top of you, this is the next one, and and being
it's not even an easy balance to.
It's not because you want to be cool and serious about it, but you also don't want to be like right on top of everybody all the time, and it just I think those type of things start at the top. And if people feel pressured in the wrong way, they're just going to be like, we really got to sell, and the result is they actually do sell a lot of wine. So, and it's because they're making interesting stuff too. So I love that white blend they did. But speaking of whites, you haven't finished telling me all about your wines you make. So Pinot Gris, you making as well?
We made a Pinot Gris one year, which was incredibly successful, which is why we had to bin it. Because it really did monopolize our sales, and it did an amazing job of opening the door for our brand into great restaurants in Wellington and Auckland and elsewhere. But we could see what it was doing.
Yeah,
and it was a slightly lower price point, and I've been in this game long enough to see that slide happen with small wineries that get encouraged by their distributor or have an opportunity to make a cheaper wine or something that they didn't originally want to do, and it's a slippery slope. And you'll suddenly get carried away into the second label that drives your brand, or a cultivar that you had never had great interest in driving your brand. And so I've been through it with so many other wineries where it took the eye off the ball. And so we had one great successful year with it, and much to our distributors' disappointment, we said,
no, that's a good move. Anymore. I was talking about that with Yvonne last week, even though we're not doing quite this in real time, but we were talking about the Pinot Gris confusion out there and stylistically. But anyway, I like that one. You did hit the mark with it. I could see why it was successful. But
yeah, it was a good wine, and it's a Pinot Gris we actually enjoyed drinking and selling. I've had some amazing Pinot Gris from here and from Alsace that really knocked my socks off. I think it takes almost that Cabernet viticultural discipline in the vineyard on Pinot Gris to get that quality, and for some reason you just don't get rewarded with that in the marketplace with bottle price. So you end up making a great wine that rubs your ego, but certainly won't pay the expenses.
And so we said Gamay,
Chardonnay, Pinot, and Syrah is the other.
Syrah.
Yeah. Heard of that?
New site, Syrah, or your site?
No, currently the one we've got at the moment is from Mary Road in the Gimlet Gravels. The 2015 is the new release. We're a little bit suspect about the 2017 was the first crop off our own vineyard. 2017, as you know, was an interesting vintage.
No, it's cool.
It's an interesting vintage. We're not sure we're going to bottle that under Easthope Family Winegrowers yet, but I mean, we've only just pressed it off and put it to barrel, so it might be.
I think Syrah does surprise you, but you're right. It can be tough to have a drop off stylistically. It might be a nice wine to drink, but if it lacks intensity or something like that, you're right that it's.
And we all know that 2018 is going to be incredible. So
amazing. I can feel it right now.
I can feel it today.
You can see it in the vines that are about to be pruned.
So that's the main thrust, but we have planted Cabernet Franc on the vineyard as well.
Oh, cool.
And we'll look to do. We've planted that in bush vine formation.
Cool.
And part of that reasoning was, we established some vineyard in the conventional way with those, tall things, the posts and all the wire. And I walked out of the 1 hectare, it's 28 kilometres of wire. The drip lines, the posts. I was like, all that infrastructure just to hold a vine up off the ground. And this comes back to my South African contacts again, and experience that we made some great wines off bush vine there. So we're going to give it a crack here. We've planted it in a grid formation, 2.5 metre spacing in both directions, so that we can actually cultivate in both directions. So forget the fact that they're actually in rows.
Yeah.
And even with this young vineyard now in that format, it's a totally different feeling. You can walk through your vineyard in any direction you want. It's and you can cultivate right up to the vine trunk without specialized equipment. Just the rototiller on the back of your tractor, and you can. So it solves that. The greatest hurdle to becoming organic, which is in New Zealand, is weed control. It gets around that relatively easily. And that's part of the reasoning, but also just the...
Wait, how does it get around that? Sorry, I didn't...
Well, I think, within rows and conventional plantings, you need some quite specialised turnisol equipment or mowing equipment to go totally in between vines within row. And I think, a lot of the modern equipment does a pretty good job, but not perfect. And this, you can go right up to the vine trunk on these if you establish, a bit of a trunk. Before you goblet it out, and it gets around that. It just feels right.
No, I can see.
So the thing against us, if it doesn't work, is New Zealand's vigour. Some years, but I think we catalyse our vigour unnecessarily in New Zealand with unneeded irrigation. Draconian weed control sometimes, all that sort of thing just propagates vine vigor rather than ripening. And so I think we've got tools in our armory just to choke the vine and get almost a bonsai effect happening on the vine.
I was just thinking you should talk. I don't know if you're heading to California anytime soon for your sales, but
I'll be there on the 17th or 18th of June.
Oh, look at that. I put you in touch with a guy who's been on the podcast who's a buddy. I haven't talked to in a while, but this guy, Tegan Pasalacqua, he's a winemaker at Turley.
Cool name.
Yeah, awesome name, right? But he was at Craggy years ago. He won the scholarship probably right before you got there. So he was when Doug was there originally.
Oh, right. Okay.
And it's just a super interesting guy, really smart, really passionate. I mean, he's the guy you want to go out to dinner with in Napa because he's him and the chef friend of mine who I know, Tegan, through, they know the guy, the Som, they know the chef. And they know, what's open tonight, what can you open, and they know all the good stuff at all the good restaurants and everything. But he is, I think even his Twitter handle and Instagram is Own Rooted. So he's found these old vineyards in California. Now, granted, they don't have a similar climate as far as vigor and things like that, but it does a lot of bush vine stuff. Mm-hmm. And I just think a really interesting, passionate guy who, he would probably have some insight and just be cool to meet him. He's a great guy. But I need
to meet the guy that can help me with bird control in my bush vine vineyard.
Well, that is another thing that visitors say here when they come from America is that they just can't believe the birds in the morning that they hear when they're here. And I said, it's a unique place for that. And you got to, where I grew up around Philadelphia and New Jersey and stuff, it's dense. There are trees. People think, okay, you kind of live near the city or so. it's humid there, so there's a lot of growth. But the birds, it's nothing like it is here. You know what I mean?
It's a phenomenon here. Just, clouds of starlings can come and decimate a vineyard in a day.
Yeah.
I think New Zealand has some unique hurdles. Or Hawke's Bay, I think, late summer rain is always an issue. We have to dodge sort of mid-March.
Oh, yeah. Every year I've been here.
And birds and frost. And those are things that are major challenges to viticulture here. If we didn't have those, it'd be easy. But having said that, every region has its own unique sort of set of problems. But
yeah, I think the positives definitely outweigh. But even the greatest vintages we've had here, like 13 and 14, both had rain in March. You know?
And at least always the threat of it.
Yeah, forcing the hand, if you will.
Yeah. And my, global warming, I think the risk to Hawke's Bay is more of that subtropical drift in some years. So, we've got to be mindful of that.
Yeah, what a strange year we had this year. We're driest, windiest, hottest summer I've been here. It was amazing out this way. I mean, I didn't have to mow the lawn once all summer. It was just dry.
Yeah. I grew up on a vineyard here in Hawke's Bay. My mum remarried quite a large grape grower here, and grew up on that vineyard through the 80s. And it was just a run of just exceptional vintages. Summers were always hot and it never rained. And so I thought that was the region I was investing in. But it goes in cycles. But we do get one of these challenging vintages once every 5 or 6 years, and you have to plug that into your spreadsheet.
You do. You do. Well, cool, man. I think we just blew through a good 45 or so, maybe close to that, not quite an hour. But I do want to plug all your stuff before we go. The website is
Easthope, easthope.co.nz. So EASTHOPE.
Twitter handles and
I don't do Twitter, but
Instagram you're on. Yeah.
Instagram is just at Rod Easthope.
Yeah.
And I think my wife's got one at Easthope Winegrowers as well. Yeah. So.
And can they come out for a private?
Yeah,
tasting?
we're not open to the public. Just drive in, but certainly just give us a call or contact us through the website. We're always looking for an excuse not to do real work for a couple of hours.
Yeah.
So guests most welcome.
And reach out if you're in California. Rod will come visit you and bring you his wines. And,
Hell yeah.
Swap, which, by the way, I think I need to do some swapping with you.
Sounds good to me.
All right, man. Cheers.
All right. Cheers.
Okay, there you go. Rod Easthope. Cool dude. Really, really intelligent and interesting guy. I thought it was pretty cool that he was one of the first people I didn't have to say, get up on the microphone. He's got a voice that carries that guy, man. Really cool. Thank you, Rod. Again, check them out at easthope.co.nz. And they're all over Instagram. Great property. Go down and check out those amazing wines he's making there. Again, check out the Falk events. There's a few left. I really suggest being a part of that. It's cold this time of year in Hawke's Bay. Get out and do something, man. We're having frost in the morning. We're not used to this, We like sunny, warm Hawke's Bay. But, it's been a bit frosty, and, it can so easily just get hunkered in and not get out and do anything here in country living that we have here in Hawke's Bay. So get out and do something. There's tons of events. Super celebration coming up this Saturday, the 17th, and then next Friday and Saturday lunches with Pippi at home by the fire. So check those out on the Falk website. Also wanted to mention I've been asked to do the grape debate this year, which should be really fun. It's some boutique producers such as myself and Rod and Tony Bish, who I'm going to have on the podcast next week, up against some of the big dogs, some of the big corporate wineries. Should be pretty fun. It's all for charity. We're going to debate, I don't know, who's cooler, I guess. I have no idea. We're going to debate all this stuff. It's all for charity for the low corporation helicopters, which, trust me, if you live in New Zealand, is a very, very important thing. We're far away from major roads. If somebody has a big accident or a big problem, you need those helicopters. So check that out. I think the tickets are sold out, but I did hear, don't tell them I told you, but I did hear they're going to hold some aside and they might release a few more. It's going to be at Tiawa Winery, and it's going to be hilarious. I've heard about, they've done it, I think it's the third or fourth time they've done it, and it just seems like it's going to be a blast. So big dinner, should be really fun. Hope some of you guys can make it, and we see some familiar faces there. Yeah, that's just about it. Again, decibelwines.com. We're now shipping to the UK, which is cool. And, of course, the US and New Zealand, Australia. Check it out. Some new releases. Thanks, guys. Cheers.